Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The sun smiled gently over the modest compound in Surulere, casting a golden hue on the colorful Ankara tents and white canopies. The air was thick with the aroma of jollof rice, grilled chicken, and soft music from hired speakers. Laughter echoed from every corner. Uncles gossiping, aunties dancing barefoot, children chasing each other with balloons. In the center of it all stood Damian IB, adjusting his simple but well-ironed navy blue kaftan. His eyes sparkled with pride as he watched Ngozi walk toward him, wrapped in a coral-embellished white lace gown that flowed like poetry. Her dark skin glowed in the Lagos heat, her smile shy yet sure. To the world, it was a wedding of love, not money, not class, but of two hearts that had endured years of poverty and separation. Guests took photos, sprayed 50 Nigerian Naira's notes, toasted Fanta and malt, and praised God for such a genuine union. In every look between Damian and Ngozi was a story of patience and sacrifice. But not everyone smiled that day. From inside a black Mercedes SUV parked across the street, a heavily made-up woman in her early 40s sat watching the ceremony through tinted glass. Her red lipstick barely moved as her eyes followed Damian's every gesture. That woman was Mrs. Vivian Over, the managing director of Bristone Technologies, and Damian's current boss. She wore a crimson designer blouse with gold embroidery and oversized sunglasses, though the wedding wasn't hers. Her fingers tapped against her steering wheel, and with every cheer from the guests, her face hardened. Behind the dark shades were eyes filled with contempt and possession. She hadn't been invited. She came unannounced, driven by a feeling she hadn't felt in years: rejection. Damian had chosen another woman over her, a girl who sold Puff Puff at the roadside before she upgraded him. She took a long drag of her vape, exhaled slowly, and muttered to herself, "Enjoy it while it lasts, he's mine. He just doesn't know it yet." Inside the ceremony, Damian and Ngozi exchanged vows, not with borrowed poetry, but raw, tearful truth. They promised to survive whatever life threw at them, even if it meant starting their marriage inside a single-room apartment with one standing fan and a shared mattress. For Damian, this day wasn't just about marriage, it was redemption, a fresh start, a declaration that his past mistakes were buried, his heart fully Ngozi's. For Ngozi, this was the victory of love over shame. Many mocked her for waiting on a struggling man, but today proved them wrong. They danced that evening not with the grace of the rich, but with the joy of survivors. But even as they celebrated, no one noticed the black SUV pulling away slowly, like a shadow retreating for now, but waiting to strike. This wasn't the beginning of their forever. It was the calm before a storm so cruel it would leave scars deeper than divorce. 3 months earlier, the picture was very different. Damian sat on a plastic chair inside a crowded hospital corridor, his shirt damp with sweat and anxiety. His mother, Mama IB, lay inside Ward C battling chronic kidney failure. Doctors demanded 180,000 Nigerian Nairas by Monday for her dialysis. The last 2 jobs he applied for ghosted him, and his bank account had just 12,300 Nigerian Nairas left. It was in that desperation he first walked into Bristone Technologies, a mid-sized tech company on the island. He wasn't fully qualified for the role of systems technician, but he was hungry, respectful, and eager to learn. Vivian had noticed him from the first day, not for his resume, but for his innocence. She watched him like a hawk, always alone at his desk, always quiet during lunch, always borrowing data to send out his mother's hospital updates. She loved power, and Damian's vulnerability tasted like sugar in her tea. At first it was subtle, a compliment on his haircut, standing too close during briefings, offering him rides to the bus stop even when it was out of her way. Damian, grateful and naive, thought she was just a kind boss. But it wasn't long before she began making remarks with double meanings. "Your fiancé is lucky. But then again, some of us don't mind sharing. If I had a man like you, I'd never let him go to waste behind a laptop all day." One Thursday evening, as they worked late on a company server issue, Vivian locked the office door and poured herself a drink. Damian stood awkwardly, feeling her eyes trace his every move. She walked over, glass in hand, and said softly, "You know I can change your life. I can pay your mother's hospital bills. I can give you a car. But everything has a price." Damian laughed nervously, pretending not to understand. She stepped closer and placed a hand on his chest. "I want you. And you want to save your mother. It's not love, Damian. It's just survival." He tried to walk away, but she blocked him. "You need this job. If you walk out that door, you'll lose it." Her voice was calm, not angry, like someone offering a business deal. That night, he left the office shaken. For the first time in years, Damian couldn't pray. He stared at his phone screen, a photo of his mother in the hospital, and realized he was trapped. 2 weeks later, he returned to the office after visiting the hospital with bills that doubled. The stress ate at him. Vivian, dressed in a tight purple gown, waited in her office. She didn't say much, just placed a sealed brown envelope on her desk. "Nigerian Naira 200,000 cash. I'm a woman of my word." Damian hesitated, heart pounding. He stared at the envelope, then at her. It felt like choosing between dignity and death. With trembling hands, he took the money. Vivian smiled. "Good boy. Now come lock the door." That moment broke him, not just as a man, but as a human. He walked out 15 minutes later, unable to look himself in the mirror. He bathed 3 times that night, but the shame stuck to his skin like oil. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a necessary evil. But deep down, something told him Vivian wasn't done with him. She was just getting started. Blue Book Chapter 3, The Weakest Moment. After that night, Damian avoided her as much as he could, but it was like trying to outrun your own shadow. Vivian didn't even pretend anymore. She sent voice notes to him at midnight, sometimes moaning into the microphone. She bought him designer shoes and told HR he had been promoted to her executive assistant. He began earning more, enough to rent a small apartment in town and prepare for his wedding. But his smile never reached his eyes. Every step toward building a future with Ngozi came with a silent price, knowing that every spoon of rice he bought, every rent he paid, every down payment on wedding items, had Vivian's fingerprint on it. He tried to tell himself he'd never do it again, but her threats were constant. "Break off the engagement or I'll tell her everything. Say the child is yours, and I'll give you a car. Marry her, and I will ruin your life." One rainy evening, Ngozi was helping him rearrange the curtains in the new apartment when she touched his back and he flinched. She looked at him, confused. "Are you okay?" Damian nodded too quickly. "Just tired." But he was drowning. Vivian had become obsessive, sending lingerie photos, threatening to show up at his wedding, and even once following him on a date with Ngozi and watching them silently from her car. The paranoia ate at him. When Ngozi said she was ordering invitation cards, Damian's heart dropped. That night, he told his friends, Chucks and Emeka, everything. They laughed at first, until they saw the fear in his eyes. Chucks slapped his shoulder and said, "Guy, it's just sex. No be love. Collect the money and marry your babe." Emeka added, "Boss lady not blessing in disguise. Women like that don't want love. Just body. Focus on your future." Damian took their advice as a last resort, convincing himself it was survival. The last time he visited Vivian's hotel suite, he didn't protest when she undressed. He didn't speak when she called him baby. He didn't even touch the drink she poured. When it was over, he stood up, took a shower, dressed, and walked out. No goodbye. No eye contact. No feeling. He thought that would be the end. He thought Vivian would get tired. Instead, she doubled down, now sending baby pictures, telling him she missed her family, calling him daddy. By the time the wedding arrived, Damian was emotionally dead. He stood beside Ngozi with trembling lips and a heavy heart. But he forced a smile. He promised himself that whatever darkness he came from, it would not follow him into the light of his marriage. But darkness has a way of finding cracks. The wedding was barely 2 weeks past, but the sweet glow of newlywed bliss was already fading inside their one-bedroom apartment. Ngozi noticed first the way Damian would pause before entering the room, the way he stared into space longer than usual after morning devotion. He had always been affectionate, but now he touched her only when necessary, like a man walking on broken glass. At first, she chalked it up to stress. The rent, new responsibilities, his mother's medications. Life was heavy. She made pepper soup to lift his mood, added extra pepper because he liked it hot. But he barely touched it. "I'm not hungry," he mumbled, eyes fixed on his phone. Sometimes, she'd hear him step outside to take calls late into the night. One evening, she pressed her ear against the door when he said, "I told you not to call me again. I'm married now." Her heart froze. She didn't ask. Instead, she prayed harder, binding spiritual attacks, and begging God not to let the devil steal her joy so soon. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Ngozi noticed Damian's work shirt had lipstick smeared faintly on the collar. Not her shade. She held the shirt up in disbelief, her heart racing, but again said nothing. It wasn't that she was weak. It was that she trusted him. Or rather, she wanted to. Damian had been her first love, the only man who ever truly saw her when she sold Puff Puff at mile 12. She remembered the days he'd buy her entire tray just so she could rest. That kind of love didn't just disappear. But still, something was off. Her instincts began to whisper where her faith refused to listen. The final blow came one evening, when she mistakenly picked up Damian's phone to check the time, and saw an unread voice note from Madame V. Her thumb hovered. Something told her to leave it alone. But curiosity, that cursed cousin of heartbreak, won. She pressed play. Vivian's voice echoed from the speaker, sultry, smug, cruel. "How does she feel sleeping beside a man I've tasted?" Ngozi dropped the phone like it burned her. She stood there, staring into nothing, as her chest heaved like waves hitting a broken shoreline. She waited for Damian to return from buying suya. When he stepped in, cheerful and unaware, she just looked at him. Not a word, not a tear, just quiet. And that silence was worse than any slap. He noticed her holding the phone, saw her face, and knew. "Ngozi," he began, but she raised one hand gently. "Don't lie," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to know. Was it before or after you proposed to me?" Damian's mouth opened, then closed. The truth sat heavily on his tongue, but shame wouldn't let it out. That night, they slept back to back, like strangers. And when Ngozi turned her face to the wall and cried silently, she didn't do it for the betrayal. She wept for the version of Damian she could never unsee again. The sun had barely risen when the loud honk of a Mercedes SUV shattered the silence of their compound. Neighbors turned toward the gate as the black vehicle reversed skillfully into the open space and parked without invitation. The driver stepped out and opened the back door. Then, like a scene from a Yoruba film, Vivian Uver emerged, dressed in flowing emerald lace, with gold heels clicking confidently on the pavement. In her arms was a baby boy, maybe 10 months old, dressed in a branded Gucci romper. The neighbors gathered instantly. Auntie Bucky from the second floor paused her sweeping. Mama Nkechi whispered to the landlord's wife, "Waladan, wear lipstick." But the real storm hadn't started. Vivian adjusted her geli, gave the baby to her nanny, and walked straight to Damian and Ngozi's door like she owned the land they were standing on. She knocked once, loud and deliberate. When Damian opened the door, wearing nothing but boxers and a t-shirt, his face went pale. Vivian smiled wickedly. "Meet your son, Damian," she announced in full voice, lifting the baby into the air. "The one you've been hiding from your innocent wife." Ngozi appeared behind him, her wrapper barely tied, her hair covered in a net. The crowd outside thickened, phones already out, some recording. Damian tried to pull Vivian inside, but she pulled away theatrically and shouted, "Don't hide me. Or is this not the same man who slept with me after work hours? Ask him, Mrs. IB." Ngozi looked from the baby to Damian, her mouth slightly open, but no sound coming out. Vivian turned to her with a satisfied smirk. "You thought you won, didn't you? Sweetheart, he never stopped coming to me. He even told me you were a mistake. Shall I show you the voice notes?" She waved her phone. Damian's knees nearly buckled. The crowd gasped. From one of the balconies, a neighbor shouted, "Che, men will stain your white." Ngozi stood rooted in place, her entire world collapsing before her. Damian finally found his voice. "Vivian, stop this madness," he yelled, reaching for her phone. But she pulled back. "Madness? You think you can marry someone else and pretend this child doesn't exist?" She turned to Ngozi and said, "He said he'd leave you for me. But you're stubborn, so now I've brought our son home." The nanny stepped forward with the child. Ngozi slowly walked toward the baby. Her hands trembled as she looked into the child's eyes that didn't look like Damian's. But still, her heart split open. She turned to her husband and said one line, steady and cold. "I prayed for you to be honest. I never prayed for this." She picked up her phone and walked back inside. Vivian smiled victoriously. Damian collapsed onto the stairs. The compound buzzed with murmurs. WhatsApp groups were already on fire. That morning, a marriage died. Not with divorce papers, but with shame. The days that followed were brutal. Every time Ngozi stepped out to buy pepper, she felt eyes crawling over her skin. Women at the hair salon whispered behind her back. In church, Sister Amaka shifted her chair during women's fellowship. Even the pastor's wife began hinting about sharing forgiveness in the home. But what hurt most were the women who used to admire her for her patience and dignity. They now pitied her. Some blamed her. "You two-day form, holy. You know fit hold your man," Mama Nkechi spat one evening. It was as if Vivian had orchestrated a masterclass in humiliation. The compound was no longer safe, it was a stage, and she was the main character in a tragedy she never auditioned for. Ngozi bore it with silent grace. She cooked, cleaned, and greeted everyone with a quiet smile. But at night, her pillow soaked with tears. Inside the house, Damian was spiraling. He stopped eating, barely slept. He tried to explain, but every time he opened his mouth, Ngozi walked away. His mother called every day, sensing something was wrong. But he couldn't say it. What would he tell her? That he'd sold his body and destroyed his marriage for a job? That the baby might not even be his, but he was too afraid to find out? Vivian, on the other hand, visited often, bringing the baby and parading him like a prize. "Come and greet Daddy," she'd say with a smirk. She would criticize Ngozi's cooking, her dressing, her silence. "A woman who can't fight for her man doesn't deserve one," she once said aloud at the compound's common tap. Damian was torn between shame and anger. He hadn't just failed as a husband. He had allowed the devil into his home and watched her rearrange the furniture. One evening, he knelt beside Ngozi as she washed clothes, tears running down his cheeks. "It was once," he whispered. "It meant nothing. I was desperate. I hate myself. But please believe me, the child." She paused, her hands trembling inside the soapy water. "Was it before or after you proposed?" she asked again, same soft voice, same unshakable gaze. Damian looked away. That silence said everything. That night, she sat alone in the living room, staring at their wedding photo. She traced the frame with her finger. Behind her, Damian stood helplessly. "I'm sorry, Ngozi," he said. "It was a mistake." She turned and looked at him for a long time, then replied, "A mistake is when you forget to buy salt. This was a decision." And with that, she stood and walked into the bedroom, locking the door. From the hallway, Vivian's laughter echoed once more. The tension in Damian's chest became unbearable, and like a drowning man grasping for air, he turned to the only people he thought could understand the chaos burning around him. His old friends Chucks and Emeka. He hadn't seen them since the wedding, and they hadn't reached out since the scandal. Still, shame in his throat, he called them. They met at a roadside beer parlor in Acadia, dimly lit, with generators humming in the background and smoke from suya drifting in the air. Damian sat slouched over a bottle of Gulder, face pale, eyes heavy. When he narrated everything, the wedding ambush, the supposed child, Vivian's threats, the table fell silent. Emeka rubbed his bald head nervously. Chucks, usually loud, was uncharacteristically quiet. After a long pause, Chuck spoke, his voice barely audible over the buzz of a nearby fan. "Guy, we no think you go reach like this." Emeka added, "We just say make you collect small change. You know now, survival." We didn't know she was obsessed. But Damian wasn't there for apologies. Not yet. He wanted to confront the echo in his own head that kept replaying their earlier advice. He remembered clearly the night in their small one-room apartment when Chucks had said, "Women like your boss don't want love. Nah body dem day find. Use am collect your bag." Emeka laughed that night, adding, "E fit even help you build small thing for mama in the village. Nah sense no be sin." Damian had laughed then, too. Not because it was funny, but because it helped him feel less dirty about what he was already planning to do. But now, staring at them in real time, the laughter from those memories felt like poison. "You told me to sleep with her like it was nothing. But I lost everything," he whispered. "My wife doesn't look at me anymore. My home has become a cage. My soul it's ash." Emeka looked down. Chucks sipped his drink and blinked back tears. "We didn't know she'd come to your house. With a child. With all that madness," Chucks finally said, voice breaking. "I thought you were the one using her. Turns out she was using all of us." Emeka nodded, face full of guilt. "Sometimes, guy, we know the weight of advice until the house down collapse." Damian shook his head slowly. "I should have never listened. I should have walked away. I should have told Ngozi the truth before we got married. Now even if I swear by God's name, she won't believe me again. And I don't blame her." The three men sat in heavy silence, no laughter, no cheers. Just three broken pieces of a foolish mistake. One that had grown legs, moved into his home, and begun calling him Daddy. As the night grew colder, the regret between them hung thicker than the beer-scented air. And somewhere in that shame, a bitter truth was born. Some wounds, no matter how deeply they're regretted, may never heal. The morning Vivian arrived at their doorstep with 2 travel bags and her nanny in tow. She didn't knock. She simply stepped into the compound like she owned it. Her driver offloaded her luggage without question, while compound residents peeped through their windows, waiting for drama to unfold. She walked up to the door and knocked gently, like she was visiting family. Damian opened, wearing a stained tank top, eyes sunken from a sleepless night. Ngozi sat inside, braiding her own hair silently on the floor, refusing to acknowledge the brewing storm outside. Vivian didn't wait for permission. "Good morning, husband and wife," she said with a crooked grin. "Since the child belongs here, we might as well all live like one big happy family, no?" Damian's face contorted in panic. "Vivian, you can't be serious." She laughed lightly. "I've never been more serious. I brought his food, toys, his diapers. Don't worry. I'm not here to stress what's left of your marriage. I'm just here to make sure my child is raised by his father." Ngozi didn't say a word. She didn't look at Vivian. She simply continued braiding her hair like the scene wasn't happening. But inside her, something snapped. Not loudly, not violently. Quietly, like a crack in the foundation. Damian tried to argue, begged Vivian to leave, but she ignored him and directed the nanny to set up the baby's items in the guest room. That night, the house was a war zone of silence. Vivian moved freely, opened the fridge, insulted the lack of proper groceries, and even commented on the thinness of the mattress. At dinner, she ate and wiped her mouth with a napkin before saying to Ngozi, "You can't keep a man just because you cook soup." I gave him something he couldn't resist. Ngozi slowly stood up, walked into the bedroom, and quietly began folding her clothes into a nylon bag. Damian followed her, panic gripping his chest. "Please don't go. Please." "I'll fix this," he whispered. She stopped folding and looked at him. "Fix what?" she asked, voice brittle. "The roof, the shame, or the stranger in our house." The following morning, she placed her bag by the door and swept the room one last time with her eyes. She looked at the mirror, at herself, and nodded. She turned to Vivian, who was feeding the baby, and said in calm Yoruba, "Ti ibe fefai al iduru ifai style. If you want to scatter this house, leave me out of it." Damian stood beside the door like a prisoner watching his own execution. "I'll come back when the truth returns," Ngozi said to him, not with anger, but with finality. Then she left, barefoot, without looking back. The compound watched in stunned silence as she walked out the gate, head held high. Vivian stood and peered through the curtain. "Now we can breathe," she whispered with satisfaction. Damian dropped to his knees and cried. But the heavens remained silent. News traveled fast. Within days, word reached the village, and Mama IB wasted no time. The very next weekend, a commercial bus pulled up in front of the compound, and out stepped a woman dressed in a faded anchor wrapper, headscarf tied high, with slippers slapping the dusty ground with every determined step. Her arrival was thunderous. She didn't ask for directions. She stormed straight to Damian's door, carrying a black gotta-must-go bag and fury in her chest. Neighbors stepped aside like waves parting before Moses. Vivian opened the door with a smirk, chewing gum loudly, and said, "Who are you?" Mama IB scanned her from head to toe. "I be Damian's mother. Who be you?" "The devil he hired to ruin his life." Vivian chuckled. "Careful, Mama. I have legal custody of the child, and you're trespassing." But Mama IB was not here to play legal games. "God will punish you and your legal custody. You opened your legs for a boy young enough to be your last born, and now you're parading a bastard like royalty." Inside the house, Damian rushed to hold his mother back, tears forming in his eyes. "Mama, please don't shout," he begged. But Mama IB turned to him and slapped his head hard enough to rearrange his hairline. "You let this Jezebel enter your house. Your wife Dawn Comet and you day cry for this thing." She turned back to Vivian. "Woman, pack your nonsense and carry that child out of this house before I call the police and the village elders." Vivian, insulted, stood and raised her hand to respond, but Mama IB hissed, "Raise that hand, and you will leave here without fingers." The neighbors outside gasped. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice. Vivian hissed, picked up her baby, and shouted, "This is abuse. Damian, talk to your mad mother." But Damian stood frozen, face in his palms. "I know no when I do, Mama. I don lose everything." That night, Mama IB cooked bitterleaf soup with hot yam and sat with her son. "Tell me everything," she demanded. Damian confessed, every word laced with regret. Mama IB wept, but not for herself, for Ngozi. "That girl carried your burden like it was her dowry. And this is how you repay her?" she asked. Damian nodded. "I think the child might not even be mine." Mama IB sat up. "Then do the test. If the devil wears perfume and lipstick, expose her." Vivian sat quietly in the guest room, sensing for the first time that her reign might be ending. Mama IB had not come to Lagos to play. She had come to rescue her son, even if it meant going to war with a woman who wore designer lace and wickedness like perfume. The morning Ngozi finally left was eerily quiet. No shouting, no slaps, no tears. Just the crisp sound of zippers as she packed the last of her things into a faded traveling bag, the same one Damian had bought for her 2 years earlier when she moved from her uncle's house to start their life together. Now it held only essentials, 2 wrappers, her Bible, and the photo album from their wedding. She moved with the mechanical grace of a woman who had already grieved her loss long before it arrived. Damian stood at the doorway, leaning against the wall like a broken frame. His lips trembled with words that refused to come. She didn't glance at him. She didn't curse him. Instead, she placed her house keys on the dining table next to a folded note and paused briefly to look at the family photo on the wall, her smile frozen beside a man who had betrayed everything they once stood for. The note she left was handwritten in a soft, steady hand. It read, "I hope you enjoyed what you destroyed. I'll return when truth speaks louder than pride." That line haunted Damian long after she left. The neighbors pretended not to watch as she walked out of the compound. But they saw everything. The way she balanced the bag on her head with quiet poise. The way her eyes stayed forward, never blinking, never flinching. Mama Nkechi whispered to her daughter, "This girl carry class inside pain." Auntie Bucky sighed and said, "If not me, I go pour hot water for that woman." But Ngozi didn't want to fight. She just wanted freedom from the gossip, the betrayal, and the cold silence that had replaced the laughter in her marriage. She boarded a Kiki to her cousin's place in Abulegba without looking back. No one knew what she was thinking, but deep inside, a seed of survival had been planted. Back in the flat, Damian sat on the edge of the bed for hours, the note clutched tightly in his hand. Mama, IB, didn't speak much. She simply swept the sitting room angrily, banging the broom against the tiles as if trying to sweep away shame itself. Vivian, sensing victory, emerged from the guest room with her robe loosely tied and baby on her hip. See? She finally left. Some women know when they've lost, she said smugly. Damian didn't reply. He just stared at the wall like he was watching his past collapse in real time. Vivian reached out to place a hand on his shoulder, but Mama, IB, slapped it away. If you touch my son again, knock off and go settle us. Vivian hissed, but the message was clear. The war had begun, and the battlefield was his home. But this time, the silence wasn't Ngozi's, it was Damian's. And in that silence, regret began to rot everything it touched. With Ngozi gone, Vivian declared herself queen of the house. She rearranged the furniture, added pink throw pillows to the couch, and insisted the nanny deep clean the kitchen with imported soap. She bought curtains with her initials embroidered in gold thread and replaced Ngozi's cooking utensils with stainless steel ones from a foreign supermarket. The compound buzzed with disbelief. She's not even married to him, oh, someone said. Wedding day worry this woman SEF, another murmured. But Vivian didn't care. To her, possession was 9/10 of the law, and as far as she was concerned, she had the man, the house, and the child. Damian barely spoke. He moved like a shadow in his own home, always avoiding eye contact. At night, he slept on the couch while Vivian and the baby occupied the bedroom. When Mama IB tried to fight her again, Damian stepped in. Not to defend Vivian, but to keep peace. Just let her finish whatever game she's playing, he said quietly. But Vivian wasn't playing. She was conquering. She began answering Damian's calls, telling clients and colleagues he was unavailable. She started calling herself Mrs. IB when they visited the clinic or went to the pharmacy. She even printed a set of baby photos and hung them on the wall beside Damian and Ngozi's wedding picture. Every time she passed by, she would pause, tilt her head, and mutter, "Poor thing." Still thought love was enough. The neighbors watched the show unfold like a badly written drama, but nobody dared intervene. Damian stopped going to church. He avoided his friends. He no longer called Ngozi. He felt like a prisoner doing time for a crime he couldn't undo. Mama IB, once a fierce warrior, fell ill from stress and began staying in her room more, her once booming voice reduced to groans. Vivian ruled the house with subtle cruelty. She would play love songs on the speaker, claiming they were for the baby, but always looking at Damian as if the lyrics were aimed at him. She would cook meals he liked, but eat them loudly with the nanny, offering him none. "You said you liked the gussie, so I made it for us," she'd say mockingly. Damian barely touched his plate. The one time he tried to speak with her civilly, asking if they could have a conversation about boundaries, she laughed in his face. "Boundaries? You crossed all of them the day you came into my hotel room. Now you want fences? Too late, lover boy." He stood up and walked away, fists clenched. Inside his heart a war raged between the man who once had dreams and the coward who now lived in chains. He didn't know how, but something had to give. And soon. The first seed of doubt was planted one night while Damian was cleaning the baby's used bottle. He had begun helping with minor tasks, just to feel like a human being again. As he rinsed the bottle, he noticed the baby watching him from the mat, silent, calm, unfamiliar. The boy didn't smile at him, didn't stretch his arms like babies did when they recognized familiarity. The thought flickered and vanished, or so he thought. But then it returned when Vivian asked him to take the baby for vaccinations, and the nurse looked between them and said, "Olga, the child no resemble you na carbon copy of a mama." Damian forced a laugh, but the words stabbed his ego like a dagger. That night, he sat alone on the balcony with the child sleeping inside and stared at the moon. What if I'd been living with a lie?" he whispered to the wind. He began to notice more. The child had dimpled cheeks, but Damian never did. The child had light brown eyes. No one in Damian's family line ever did. The baby's birthday didn't add up to the timeline of their supposed encounter. And then, the final blow. Vivian's phone buzzed late one night while she was in the bathroom, and Damian, without thinking, glanced at the screen. A message from a man named Chris read, "So you're still claiming Damian's the father? I told you the test won't lie, forever." His heart dropped. He stared at the phone, his mind spinning. Chris? Test? Was there already a DNA test done? Was she hiding something? When Vivian returned, he confronted her immediately. "Who is Chris?" he demanded. She scoffed, towel around her chest. "Just an old friend." "Why are you going through my phone?" Damian stood up. "You've lied about everything else. Tell me the truth. Is this child mine?" Vivian looked away, then laughed loudly. "Wow. So now you want to play the paternity card? After all we've shared? Touching." Damian's jaw tightened. "If you won't answer me, I'll find the truth myself." He made up his mind that night. He would get a DNA test done, secretly. He had access to the child's pacifier, and Vivian would be out for her usual spa appointment the next day. Mama IB supported the plan. "I told you that Baby Day looked like one Yoruba actor I see for Africa Magic," she said. Damian didn't laugh, but inside him, a flicker of hope sparked. Not because he wanted to escape fatherhood, but because he wanted the truth. Whatever it was, he needed to know if the woman who destroyed his marriage had also fooled him into raising another man's child. For the first time in months, Damian felt something close to strength. Quiet strength, like the kind Ngozi once carried. And as he sealed the sample envelope, he whispered, "Let truth speak louder than pride." Just like her note had said. Ngozi didn't cry anymore. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had cried herself dry. Living with her cousin Amaka in a cramped room in Abyel Egba wasn't glamorous, but it gave her what she hadn't had in weeks: peace. Amaka, a loud but loyal hairstylist, welcomed her with open arms, and slowly, Ngozi began to breathe again. She didn't talk much about Damian, and Amaka, despite her own fury, didn't push. One morning, Ngozi woke up and stood in front of the mirror. Her eyes were tired, her face pale, her lips dry. But underneath all that, she saw something she hadn't in a while. Herself. Behind this unraveling chaos, not the woman, no longer the forgotten boy from the slums, just Ngozi, but now a billionaire with hands that could cook, and the shadows that orchestrated every legal battle. She decided to take back her name. With the little savings she had, she bought ingredients from the local market, so borrowed Amaka's gas cylinder, multinational and companies making now relied on him for their imports and exports. What began as 3 plates partnered with companies in front of the compound turned into 30, offering them better deals. By the end of the first week, more reliable services spread, and cutting one girl day sell correct jollof. His name echoed in boardrooms. No salt, not as no burn, the cleaner's son, and Stuno Day but as Mr. Chukwuemeka, one customer said. CEO of CN Global Holdings, tagged her on Instagram. He sat behind his mahogany desk in his glass tower office. By the second week, sipping tea, as reports flowed in of a small business was being born from empire. Her smile was became comfort for others. His eyes sharper than ever. When she still couldn't taste, he whispered to himself, staring at Obina's company logo on the report, tied up in order. You will kneel. She felt a piece of her spirit return. The grand ballroom at the Lagos International Business, one even said, glittered. You're too soft to be chandeliers. One day, it was an event reserved for the elites. She smiled and whispered, governors, CEOs, and international investors. He just forgot. Obina still had attended the event for decades, not out of hope, often as a scar, at the high table, a reminder, revered, her silence, envied, wasn't and weakness. Respected. It was her greatest form of strength. His name she was not still on the invitation. She would his not position on the guest list. She would simply become untouchable. People no longer rushed to greet him. While some nodded politely, or gossiped while others whispered, behind his back, sit by the window. But the final blow came when the not in words of bitterness, for the evening, but in prayers. A name most of them had recently come to respect for joy, but never seen in person. For healing. Ladies and gentlemen, fried rice for please dignity. Welcome the CEO of CN Global Holdings. Feeding others, Mr. Chukwuemeka became ministry. The room, and while the compound erupted in Surreal, whispered about the broken marriage. His fork dropped. Her small corner, his heart skipped. In Abyel Egba, the double began to sing her praises. And there he was. Yes. She never posted anything spiteful online. They once knew. She never hinted gone was the at the skinny, betrayal. Weary-eyed her boy of the past. Cooked in his place stood a man dressed in a perfectly tailored black Italian suit. In her food and in her sparkling eyes, with a Rolex. One day, that alone she saw a massive request on Instagram. His presence, Damian, commanding the air itself. Another
his skin
came.
glowed,
Then
his
a
beard
third.
trimmed to perfection.
She didn't open them.
His posture
Not yet.
upright, like
The
royalty.
fire he lit
his
had
eyes
burned her,
scanned
but
the
it had
room
also
with the
refined
calm of
her.
a lion among
Now,
sheep.
she was not
until
just
they
a woman
locked with
rebuilding her life.
and Amara's.
She was a
For
woman
a second,
who had survived
the world
a public
seemed to
storm
pause
without raising
Amara
her voice.
choked on her wine,
and that
her
in
hand
Lagos
trembling
was
as the
power.
glass
Damian
clinked against
hadn't
her teeth.
stepped out of his flat
Obina's
in
face
days.
lost all color.
The walls
his
felt
lips
like
parted,
witnesses
but no
to his
words
guilt.
came out.
Every corner
Chuka didn't
reminded
flinch.
him of
He
Ngosi's
walked
laughter.
past them.
Every
His
plate
cologne,
Vivian touched
leaving a
felt
trail of
tainted.
dominance.
Even the
And
baby's
took the
cries,
stage.
once a source
His
of
speech
forced
was
obligation,
powerful, eloquent,
now rang in
and
his
filled
ears
with subtle
like
jabs
accusations
that only a few
he
could
sat
decode.
in the dark
In
most
this
nights,
world, he began,
staring
his
at
voice
the DNA
rich
test
and commanding.
results
He hadn't yet
empires
revealed.
aren't inherited.
The results sat
They are
sealed
built
in his drawer,
and those
unopened,
who build with their
like a
bare
loaded
hands
gun.
understand
But before
the value
he could
of
process
loyalty,
the truth,
patience.
he needed to
and
confront
integrity,
the echoes
qualities
of his own
money
choices.
alone can't
That's how
buy.
he found himself
The
once
applause
again
was
at the
thunderous.
Suya joint
Camera
in Acacia,
flashes
sitting
lit the room.
across from
But at
Chucks
one corner
and
of the
Emeka.
hall,
Amara
this time,
sat stiff.
he wasn't looking
her
for
eyes
advice.
unable to tear
He
away
was
from
looking
the man
for truth.
she once
Raw,
mocked as a
unfiltered,
poverty-stricken
the
boy.
kind that could only
Her
come
lips
from the
trembled
same
as
mouths
reality
that
hit
had
her
once
like a
steered
storm.
him into ruin.
He was bigger
The
than
moment he
Obina
sat
now.
down,
They
much
could see
bigger.
it. He was
Obina,
thinner,
swallowing
quieter,
the humiliation
drained.
like bile.
I did it, he said,
clenched his
voice
fist
hoarse.
onto the table.
I ruined
A
it.
voice in his
She
head
left.
whispered,
Vivi moved
"You
in.
should have never thrown
And now
that boy
everything
away."
is gone.
But it was too
Emeka
late.
looked at Chucks,
The tables
then
weren't
sighed.
just turning.
Guy,
They
we
had
messed up.
turned. We
Amara
thought we were
couldn't
helping
sleep
you
that
survive.
night.
She
But
sat
we
in her
helped you
walk-in
drown.
closet,
Chucks
staring at
rubbed his
shelves
face,
filled with
shame
luxury
written all
bags,
over it.
shoes,
That woman
and
came to
jewelry
my office
that now
last
felt
week looking
meaningless.
for you.
Her mind
Shouting
raced
that
back
you're
to the
hiding
boy
from
who once
fatherhood.
walked barefooted.
Do you
to
know
bring
how
her food.
ashamed I was?
The boy who sold
And
his
it's our
bicycle
fault just to
Damian.
pay her hostel
We
rent.
cheered you
The
into
boy she
fire
mocked
and
acted
humiliated
shocked when you got
and
burnt.
spat on.
But the
Damian
man she saw
swallowed,
today
lips
was no
trembling.
boy. I'm
He
not
was a
even
king,
sure the child
and
is
worse,
mine.
a king
I did
who
a
now
DNA
held her
test.
destiny in
I
his
haven't
hands.
opened it.
Every
The
fiber
silence
of her
at the
being
table
trembled
thickened.
with regret.
Then Emeka
But
leaned
pride,
forward,
that
tears
foolish,
in his eyes.
stubborn pride,
Open it.
refused to let
Whatever
her
it
admit
says,
maybe
we
it's
will
not
face it
too
with
late.
you.
She
Like
whispered
real
to
men.
herself.
No
Maybe
more
if
running.
I apologize,
That
maybe
night,
still.
they followed
but
him home.
even as she thought
The
it,
house was
the
cold.
bitter truth stabbed
Vivian
her.
was
She
out
didn't
with the
deserve it.
nanny.
Mama
Obina,
IB,
on the other
sat
hand,
silently in her
sat
room,
in his office,
singing
surrounded
worship
by
songs,
lawyers, financial
breath.
advisors,
Damian
and a
brought out
pile
the
of
lawsuits
lawsuits
and
that
sat
grew
at the
higher
dining
by the
table.
hour.
His
His
fingers
once
shook
loyal staff
as he
were
tore it
resigning.
open.
Line by
Suppliers
line,
refused
word
to
by
work with
word,
him.
he read.
Clients were canceling
Then he
contracts
dropped the paper
faster.
His eyes
than he could read
glazed
the
over.
termination notices.
0% match.
The realization
he whispered,
hit like a
I'm
freight
not
train.
the father. Chuka
The
was behind
silence
it.
that followed
All of it
felt like thunder.
The boy he once
Mama
denied
IB
mocked,
came out of her room
and disowned
read the
had
paper,
become the
and
architect
began
of his
dancing.
collapse.
Jehovah
Rage
talks
boiled
shame
in his
go
chest.
return to sender.
He slammed his fist against his glass table, shattering
Damian
it,
didn't
sending
move.
shards
He just
flying
sat
across
there.
the room.
Chucks
I
and
will
Emeka
destroy
hung
him,
him.
he roared.
But he didn't feel
But the
relief.
lawyer sitting before
Only
him
a
didn't
deep flinch.
ache.
Instead,
I let her
he
walk
sighed
away,
deeply
thinking
and
I
said,
fathered that
"Chief,
child.
there's
He
nothing
muttered.
you can do.
I let Vivian
His
destroy
company, it's
Ngosi's
too big.
piece.
He owns the
Emeka
entire
held his
supply
hand.
chain now.
Then
You
go
can't
tell
fight
the
him.
truth.
You can't stop
Even
him.
if she doesn't forgive
Meanwhile,
you.
in his
She
penthouse,
deserves to hear it
Chuka
from your mouth.
stood by the glass window.
Damian nodded,
staring
for the
at the
first
city
time in
lights.
months.
He
His
stood
phone
tall.
buzzed.
The
A
lie
message
was dead.
from one of his managers.
Now came the
Obina
punishment.
Holdings lost
Vivian
another
returned to the
contract
house
today.
2 hours later.
Their stock
laughing
dropped
into her phone.
17%.
Baby on her
He
hip.
smiled,
Lip
but
gloss
not out of
shining
joy,
like
out of
nothing in the
vindication.
world
had changed.
This is what they made
But the
me,
moment she
he
walked
whispered.
into the living room
Yet,
and
beneath
saw
the
the test
satisfaction
paper
was
on
a
the
heavy
center
truth.
table,
Her
no
steps
amount of wealth
slowed.
could erase
Damian
the
stood
scar
by the
Amara
window
and
Obina's
Obina's cross
left on his soul.
Chucks and
But if
Emeka
life had taught
were
him
seated
anything,
like
it was that
witnesses in a
scars were
courtroom.
not weaknesses.
Mama
They were
IB
trophies
held her
of
Bible,
survival.
eyes fiery.
He closed his
Read
laptop,
it,
adjusted
Damian
his
said.
cufflinks, and
Vivian
whispered
tried
into
to
the night.
scoff.
The game
But the
isn't over
confidence
yet.
in her
It's only
faltered.
just beginning.
She walked over.
The boy they
picked
left
up the
for
sheet,
dead
and
had
in
become a
seconds
storm.
her face shifted.
And soon
her
they would
mouth
drown
twitched.
in the very
her
sea
hands
they
trembled
threw him
slightly.
into.
The
Where did you
walls
get
of
this?
Chief
She
Obina's
asked.
mansion
From the
echoed
same
with
truth
silence
you tried to bury,
darker than death.
Damian replied
Gone were the
coldly.
laughter,
You used
the
my
footfalls
shame
of servants,
to break my
the
home.
clinking of
You
wine
lied.
glasses,
And now
and
the
the
lie is
constant
dead.
buzz of political
Vivian
visits.
laughed nervously.
Instead,
So what if
papers
the test
flew around,
says he's
court
not
letters,
yours?
debt
You
notices,
still slept
foreclosure
with me.
warnings.
You still
Every
begged
sheet
me
and
for
nail
money.
in the coffin
You're not innocent
of his crumbling empire.
Damian stepped
But
forward.
even as Obina
I never
scrambled to
claimed to be
salvage what was
but
left,
the child was
the
your
universe
weapon.
prepared
And
one
now,
final blow.
the weapon has
One
turned
that would
against you.
shake the very
Vivian
ground he stood
dropped
on.
the paper
It
and
came
hissed.
unexpectedly.
I did what I
like
had to
lightning
do.
striking.
You think
an
it's
already
easy
burning
being a
tree.
woman in power?
During one of his
I wanted
desperate
you,
attempts to secure
and I don't
a loan,
regret it.
the bank
Damian
requested a
shook his
detailed
head.
asset
You didn't want
verification
me,
and
you
lineage
wanted to own
confirmation.
me.
It
And
was
when
a
I didn't
standard
choose
request.
you
But what
destroyed
followed wasn't
everything I
standard.
had. The
But
DNA test
this
required
lion
to
tonight.
verify his airship.
Mama,
A formality
clapped her
he
hands
never
once.
thought twice about.
Oh, lao no, and
became
I
the
fight
dagger
Ida
he never
Aleo.
saw coming.
God will
The
not let
medical
you
report
prosper.
was straightforward.
Vivian turned to
but to
leave,
Obinna,
but not
it read
before
like a
pointing
death
finger.
sentence. You think
His eyes
Lugosi will take you
scanned the
back?
paper over and
After
over.
everything?
Hands
Dream
trembling.
on. Sweat
Damian's
trickling
voice
down his
was
temple.
quiet.
Obinna
I'm not
Okoro
asking
is
her to
medically
take me
confirmed
back.
infertile
I
due to a
just want
severe
her to know
untreated
the
infection
truth.
sustained
The rest
over
is up to
30
her.
years ago.
Vivian
leading
stormed
to
out,
irreversible
dragging the child
azoospermia
and cursing
the
under
words
her breath.
blurred.
But
The
the meaning
door
was
slammed
sharp and clear.
as the echoes
He couldn't
faded.
father a child.
The room exhaled.
He had never been able
Chucks
to,
and
not
Amika
since
sat
his
in
youth.
silence.
But that wasn't
Mama
all.
IB
Right
began
beneath
to
it,
weep,
in bold,
not out
was
of
the
confirmation,
confirmation,
but relief.
Chukanwosu
Damian
shares
stood
no
in the middle of it
biological
all,
relation
shoulders
to Obinna
heavy,
Okoro,
but eyes clearer.
The walls
The
spun.
lies were gone.
His knees
now
buckled.
remained
For
the
a moment,
hardest part.
he gasped
telling
for
Gozi,
air, as
he
if the
walked into the
oxygen
bedroom,
had been sucked
found
out
her
the room.
old note,
His
still
vision
taped to
darkened
the mirror,
as reality
and read it again.
crashed over him.
I'll return
Chuka
when truth
was never my
speaks
biological
louder than
son.
pride.
He
But
whispered,
what terrified
the
him
truth
more
is here,
wasn't the
Ngozi.
infertility
But
revelation.
I fear I am too late.
It was the legal
That
trap
night,
he
drafted a
unknowingly
message
set
for
for
himself
not
decades
pleading,
ago.
not
In his younger
justifying,
days,
just truth.
desperate to
He
save
didn't know
face
if
from
she'd read
family
it,
ridicule
but
over
he
his
sent it
inability
anyway.
to father children.
Then, for the first time
Obinna
since she left,
had signed
he
an
slapped the
affidavit
bed,
claiming Chuka,
alone,
who
holding
Mom
her
and
wrapper
Kechi
like
was
it was a
pregnant
lifeline
with
from her previous
tears wetting the
relationship
pillow
as
he whispered her name
It was a
again
face-saving
and again.
move.
Never meant to have
Vivian
long-term
returned
consequences.
the next morning,
but now,
like a woman
that document
possessed.
was binding in
No
court.
makeup, legally.
No,
Chuka
baby was his own
just
child
wrapped
and heir.
in a tight blouse
No amount of
and
DNA
leggings that
denial
seemed
could
to change
squeeze
her
that.
bitterness
Everything,
into shape.
the companies,
She slammed
the
the door,
properties,
so
the
hard the
stocks
frame shook.
were tied to
Damian
Chuka
was
as the next
seated
in
in
the living room.
Obinna
His
felt
mother
his chest
peeling
tighten,
yam in
his
silence
heart
beside him.
erratic.
He didn't
He
rise.
staggered,
clutching
he
the
didn't
edge
flinch.
of his
His
mahogany
expression
desk
was calm,
until his
almost
knees
cold.
gave out.
So this is your
the
plan,
mighty chief
ABI.
Obinna,
Vivian
once the
barked.
king of boardrooms,
You shame
the
me
lord of
in
wealth,
front of your
collapsed
friends?
to the marble
You
floor,
throw
gasping,
DNA papers
clutching
like
his
you're
chest,
holy?
as a
You
searing
forget how
pain
many
shot
times you
through
came
him.
begging in
A
my
stroke.
office?
Right
On
there,
your knees like
right
a dog.
then. His world
Mama
didn't just
IB
crumble.
stood.
It
God
detonated.
punish your mouth.
The
she
ambulance
shouted.
sirens
But
wailed
Damian
as Obinna
held up
was
his
rushed
hand.
to the hospital.
Mama, no.
Paralyzed on his
She
right
wants
side.
attention.
Mouth
Don't give it
twisted.
to her.
Speech slurred.
Vivian's nostrils
The doctors
flared.
worked tirelessly
You think I'll go
to
down
stabilize
without
him.
a fight?
But the damage
I built
was done.
you. You
Half
were
his
nothing
body
when I
was
met
lifeless.
I paid
His
your mother's
empire
bills.
was slipping from his
Damian
grip faster
finally
than
looked
sand
up,
through fingers.
and you used your helpless
while he
chains.
battled for breath on a
She
hospital
stepped
bed.
forward,
The
standing
legal
right in
world
front of him
moved
now,
at lightning
her
speed.
voice trembling
Chuka's
from
lawyers,
rage.
armed
think
with
you'll
the
crawl back
decades-old
to that
affidavit
skinny girl
that
who
Obinna
left you?
signed,
You think the
swung into
world will
action.
clap for you?
Court
Do you
orders
know
were
how
filed.
easy it would be to
Freezing
ruin
of
you?
accounts.
I still have
Seizure
emails.
of properties.
I still
Transfer
have voice
of
notes.
ownership. I can
Every-
burn asset
everything
registered
built
under
with one phone
Obinna.
call.
Holdings now
Damian
legally
stood,
belonged
not
to
aggressive,
Chukanwosu.
not afraid,
There was no
just
escaping
weary.
it. Then do
No
it, he
loophole.
said, voice low.
No salvaste.
Burn it all. Obinna's
You've
signature.
already burned my
the
marriage.
same one he
What's
arrogantly
left?
scribbled years
Vivian
ago to
raised
hide
her
his
hand.
infertility.
It moved
became
too
the
fast.
chain dragging
A
him
slap
into
echoed
financial
across
ruin.
the room.
The news
But it
spread
wasn't from
like
her.
wildfire.
Damian
CN
slapped her.
Global Holdings
Clean.
acquires Obinna
Controlled.
Group in
No
historic
anger.
takeover. Just
It was
consequence.
all over the news.
She staggered
The
back,
blogs,
hand
the financial
to her cheek,
markets.
stunned. Headlines
Mama
screamed of the
IB
downfall
gasped,
of a
dropping
once
the am.
untouchable
Vivian
empire.
stared at him.
Social media
Tears
boiled
forming
with
in her
gossip
eyes.
and memes.
Not from pain.
Reporters
but from
gathered
ego.
outside the
You
hospital.
hit me,
she whispered,
eager
for a
No,
glimpse
Damian
of the fallen
said.
titan.
I hit
Staff
the
from
lie
Obinna
that has
Holdings,
been living
who
in
once
this house.
mocked Chuka,
Now
you can
queued
leave now
to submit job
outside
applications
the
to
slap had
CN
echoed.
Global.
The
compound
tables
was
hadn't
quiet,
just turned.
listening.
They had
Vivian
flipped,
humiliated,
shattered, and
turned
crushed
and stormed
everything
out.
beneath them.
No
Inside
suitcase.
the hospital,
No
as
baby.
Obinna stared
No
blankly
words.
at the white ceiling,
Just silence.
drool
The
leaking
kind
from the
that
side of
haunts
his
a
mouth.
person long
His mind
after they
screamed
close the door.
louder than his
Damian
paralyzed lips
sat
could
back
form.
down, head
How
in his
did it
hands.
come to this?
I shouldn't
His
have hit
eyes
her,
darted
he
around
muttered.
when the door
Mama
opened.
IB
and
shook
there
her head.
stood Chuka,
Sometimes,
tall,
now only thunder
regal,
day,
untouchable,
madness.
dressed
But
in an
inside,
immaculate
Damian
navy
felt
blue
no
suit
peace.
that seemed stitched
Violence
from power
had
itself.
never been his way.
His shoes
But in
polished
that moment,
to a mirror
it wasn't time.
rage.
Behind him stood a lawyer,
Vivian
holding
was
the
gone.
document folder
The house
that
felt
carried
lighter.
the final
But
ownership
so
transfers.
did his soul.
Empty,
Chuka walked in slowly.
like everything had
no
fallen
anger,
out.
no rage.
He stared at the
just
open
an
door,
eerie,
praying that the
calculated
same
calm.
wind
He
that
stood
carried
by the
Vivian
hospital
out would
bed,
somehow,
looking
carry
down at the
Rosie back
man
in.
who once
But
dragged
wings don't
him
work
through the
like
mud
that.
of humiliation.
And neither does
Funny,
love.
Chuka
2
said.
days later,
His voice
Vivian's
like velvet
down wrapped
fall,
around
arrived
steel.
not with
How
sirens,
a signature,
but
you
with
made
suits
thinking
and
you were
silence.
covering your shame,
3 men
became
in
the
black
same
blazers
signature
and
that
one
erased
stern
your
woman
kingdom.
in flat shoes
Obina's
knocked
mouth
on the
twitched,
compound
attempting
gate
to speak
with quiet efficiency.
but all that came was garbled
Mrs.
noise.
Vivian Uver,
They
relax,
asked the landlord.
Chuka continued.
He pointed
I'm not
silently
here for
toward the
revenge.
empty guest flat,
Life
where she
already
had
took
moved
care of that.
after Damian
I'm only
evicted
here
her.
to remind you
She left
that the son
yesterday,
you
he
threw
mumbled.
away
is
But
now the
they
man
were ready.
who owns everything
The woman
you ever
produced
built.
a warrant.
He dropped the
We're
signed
from
documents
TFCC.
on the bedside
We're
table.
here regarding
Rest
financial
well.
discrepancies in
Bristone
Bristone
Technologies.
Technologies. Amara
Several
sat in
illegal
disbelief
wire transfers
as a team of
unauthorized
officials,
payroll
accompanied by
allocations,
police
and
officers,
personal usage
marched in
of company
with sealed
funds
court
for
orders.
non-business related
Madam,
expenses.
you are hereby
we have reason to
instructed
believe
to
she
vacate
used
this
company
property.
money to rent
All
this place
assets within
and
are
sustain
now
an
under the
illegal
legal
domestic
ownership
affair
of CN
with an
Global
employee
Holdings.
under duress.
The officer read
the
aloud.
compound
Her
erupted
hands
in
trembled
whispers
as reality
phones came
hit
out.
harder than a
Someone
slap.
even shouted.
The same
This
mansion
mansion
she
she
once
once
paraded
belonged.
in, where she
But for
laughed at
Damian,
Chuka from
there
the
was no
balcony,
joy in
was
it,
now
only
being
finality.
empty, room
She
by
was
room.
found that evening
The
at a
servants
spa
she once
in
bossed
Lucky Phase
around
1,
whispered
sipping
behind her
juice
back,
and getting her
Some
nails
mocked her
done
silently.
like she still
Some
owned the world.
filmed her discreetly.
They arrested her calmly.
Amara rushed
no
to her
screaming,
closet, grabbing
just
bags,
silence.
shoes, and
As she was
jewelry,
led into the van,
stuffing them into
she
suitcases.
spotted a young woman,
but the officer
recording
stopped her
and flipped her the
Ma,
middle finger.
most of these
You
items
all
are
eat
company
crumbs
properties
and think you can judge a
purchased
queen,
with joint
she
assets.
sneered.
But
Only
the world
personal
had
clothing
stopped clapping.
is allowed.
The headlines
She gasped.
were merciless.
No, you
Tech
can't
boss
do this.
arrested for
You
embezzlement
can't.
and sex for
But
job
they could.
scandal. And they
DNA
did.
drama.
Everything she
Child
once
belongs
called
to
hers,
married
the
employees'
chandeliers,
boss,
or
or does
Persian
it.
rugs,
The
the
media
fleet
feasted
cars,
on it.
the marble
Women's
statues,
groups
all
condemned her.
tagged and marked
Staff
procedure.
at Bristone Technologies
Investors drove
came
by,
forward with
slowing
more
their
testimonies.
cars just to
One in
witness
turn admitted
the public
she had also been
humiliation.
cornered.
Her
but
friends,
fled before
those fake
things got
society
worse.
women who used
Vivian's
to crowd her
legacy
parlor for
crumbled
wine and
faster
gossip,
than a
now
poorly
posted
built
cryptic
duplex
statuses
during
online,
rainy season.
pretending
When
they had
Damian
always
saw the
known
headlines,
she wasn't worthy.
he didn't smile.
Amara
He didn't
collapsed onto
dance.
the floor.
He just
wailing,
folded the paper
holding
and
her
whispered,
head as her
"Justice
world
is
crashed
not
around
always
her.
victory."
Her phone
Mama
rang
IB
endlessly,
brought in
journalists
warm
credited her
Avrono soup
old
and said,
friends.
"You're free
now
now, my
demanding the
son."
money they once
But
lent.
Damian shook his
Her
head.
head spun.
Freedom is
Her
not the
hands
same
trembled
as
Her
healing.
stomach churned.
The wound
For the
is
first
still
time
open.
since meeting
He knew
Obina,
Vivian going
Amara
down
felt
wouldn't
what it
erase
truly
the
meant
hurt
to
she
be
caused.
powerless.
It wouldn't
Then,
erase
as
Ngozi's
if fate
tears
hadn't stabbed her
or the
deep
months
enough,
of doubt,
a black
silence,
Range
and
Rover
distance.
with tinted windows
Still,
pulled
he
up.
felt a weight
The
lift
back
from his
door
shoulders,
opened, and out
for the
stepped
first
Chuka.
time,
He cleaned
his
the
eyes
house,
scanned the
not
chaos,
because he had to,
then
but
settled on
because
her.
he wanted to.
Not with anger,
He changed
not
the
with
curtains,
hate,
but
he
with
washed
emptiness
the plates
colder
himself.
than death.
He opened
Amara
the windows
scrambled to her
and
knees,
let air back,
tears
into the
smudging
apartment.
her makeup.
Then he
Her
brought
hands
out the
trembling
wedding frame
as she
from the
crawled
drawer.
toward him. It had cracked
Chuka,
slightly
please,
during the
I'm
chaos.
sorry.
He
I'm
placed
so
it back
sorry,
on the
she
wall.
sobbed.
Not
I-
because the
I
marriage
didn't
was
know.
restored.
I was
but
stupid.
because he was ready
I-
to fight
but
for
Chuka
it,
raised his
even
hand,
if alone,
silencing her.
Ngozi
His
didn't
voice
plan
was
to
calm.
see him again.
Too calm.
Not in person.
Amara,
she had
I
deleted
forgave
his
you a long
messages,
time ago,
ignored his calls,
but not for you.
and scrolled
For
past
me,
the news headlines.
your chapter in
with
my
the
life
numb
is
focus
closed.
of a woman
Permanently.
guarding her peace.
Her tears
But when her
flowed
cousin
harder.
Amaka handed her a letter
Please,
one
she
afternoon, but
Hand
hand
delivered
delivered
by
by
Damian
adjusted his
himself,
cufflinks
and
she
walked
paused.
away.
It
Behind
was
him,
written in ink.
the mansion gates
no
closed.
emails, but this time
No
digital
digital
closed
noise.
on him. Just
They
closed
groined.
on her. It
The
read,
morning after the
I won't
mansion
beg.
was seized
I won't
felt
defend.
like a funeral.
I'll just
without
tell the
a coffin.
truth.
I
Amara
never
woke
stopped
up on the
loving
cold
you.
tile floor
The
of a
child
tiny
is
guest
not
room
mine.
that a
I
distant
have
relative
proof.
grudgingly
I was
allowed her
weak,
to sleep in.
but I never
A
chose
far
her.
cry from
I
the
lost
king-sized
you
bed
because
draped
I
in
was too
silk
afraid
she
to
once
tell the
laid
truth.
on. Her
This
phone,
is me,
which once
finally
buzzed with
choosing it.
invitations
If you
to
ever want to
exclusive
hear it all,
parties and
I'll be
high-end
waiting.
shopping sprees.
Ngozi sat
now
with a
only
letter
rang
for
with
hours.
debt collectors and
She didn't
journalists
cry.
looking
She
to
didn't
exploit
laugh.
her fall from
She
grace.
just stared. Social
And
media
then,
was
one
on
Sunday
fire.
afternoon,
Pictures of her
unannounced,
being dragged
she
out
showed
of
up
the
at the
mansion.
compound
Her
in
designer
Surrey.
bags snatched
She
from her
wore a
hands,
simple Ankara
circulated
gown and
like
flat
wildfire.
slippers. Her
Memes
hair
flooded
was
the
in
internet.
thick, natural twists.
Headlines screamed,
no
"From
makeup,
billionaire's
no
wife
drama
to homeless,
just presence."
Amara's tragic
when the
fall.
neighbors saw her,
Friends
they
she
gasped.
once dined with
Ngozi
blocked her
don't
number.
come back.
Those
Someone
who
whispered.
used to call her
Damian
Madam
opened
Amara
the door,
now
and for a
pretended
moment
they never
they
knew her.
just looked at each
Betrayed
other.
by wealth,
No words.
rejected
just
by the
silence.
very society
he stepped
she
aside,
once ruled,
and she
in a
entered.
desperate attempt to
The house was
salvage
clean,
any shred
fresh,
of dignity.
quiet.
Amara
The baby's
summoned
items
every
were
ounce
gone.
of courage
Vivian's
left in her,
perfume
and went to
no
Chuka's
longer
corporate
lingered.
headquarters.
It was like walking
a towering
into the
skyscraper
ruins
overlooking
of something
the city.
sacred.
sacred. The
You
very
wrote,
symbol of
she said
everything
softly.
he had become.
Damian nodded.
The security
It was the
guards
only thing
recognized
left I
her
hadn't done.
immediately. They
Whispering
sat
among
at the
themselves,
dining table,
some chuckling.
no accusations.
She walked in trembling,
no outbursts,
barefoot,
clothes
he handed
unkempt.
her,
With
the
no
DNA
makeup to mask her
results.
swollen,
She read it,
tear-streaked face.
folded it.
The
Placed
receptionist
it on the
stared
table.
in disbelief.
Why didn't you tell me earlier?
She asked.
I need to see
Damian's
Mr. Chuka.
eyes
Please.
welled up. Amara
Because I
stammered.
thought I didn't
Calls were
deserve
made,
to be
checks were
believed.
done.
And
Ngozi
eventually,
sighed. The
deeply,
message reached
her
Chuka's
fingers
executive
traced the
floor.
table edge.
When the
I
doors to
carried
his
your
office
shame,
opened,
Damian. She stepped
like
in.
my name was
Heart
built to
pounding
carry
like a
disgrace.
funeral drum.
He swallowed.
There he was.
I know.
Seated
She
behind
continued.
a mahogany desk.
But I also carried
dressed
love.
in a black suit.
Real love.
Gold pen in
Not
hand.
the kind that snaps
Signing
when
documents
tested.
worth more than
He wiped a
anything
tear
she ever
and I
touched in her
destroyed
life.
She looked
Amara
up.
fell to her knees the moment their eyes met.
Whether it grows
Chuka,
again
please
or not,
forgive me,
only time
please.
can tell. I was young,
She stood,
foolish,
ready to leave.
I didn't know, she
Damian
sobbed,
rose with
crawling
her.
toward him.
Do you hate me?
He asked. I missed
She
the man
paused,
who once brought me
then
food
smiled.
when my mother
A
was
tired,
sick.
graceful
The man
smile.
who paid my school
No,
fees. I just
I
love
miss
myself more now. I miss the man I betrayed. The compound
Chuka
held its
stood
breath
slowly,
again, walked
but
around
this
the
time,
table. No one
towering
whispered
over her broken
no
frame.
one gossiped. His eyes
Because
were void of
what they
warmth.
had just witnessed
You missed the man you spat
wasn't
on,
a scandal.
he asked quietly.
It was survival,
voice calm,
with dignity,
but sharp like a blade.
Damian's days
the man
became
you called
quieter,
poverty-stricken,
but not
the man
easier.
you laughed at
With
while
Vivian
guards
gone
dragged
and
him
the
out
house
of the mansion,
now
you
a
now
shell
beg
of
for.
memories.
Her
He
sobs
moved
grew
through
louder.
it like a man
She
in
grabbed
mourning.
his shoes.
Everything
Her
reminded him
tears
of Ngozi,
soaking the leather.
Her scent still
But then
faintly
Chuka
clung
knelt
to the bedroom
not to comfort
pillows.
her, but
Her
to look her
handwriting
dead in the
still
eyes.
danced across recipe
I forgave
notes
you, he said
pinned
softly.
near the fridge.
But forgiveness
remove
doesn't
them.
mean
He
restoration.
didn't dare.
You lost
Instead,
me.
he began
Forever.
cooking her meals.
With that,
not because he wanted to
stood,
pretend she
nodded
was
at the
there,
security
but because it
standing
was
by
his way
and
of
whispered,
confessing daily.
escort her out.
Atoning.
The last
His
thing
friends
Amara
Chucks
saw
and
was the
Emeka
office
stopped
door
by less
closing,
frequently
not
now,
just the physical
sensing
door,
his need
but
for
the door
solitude.
to the life
Even
she
Mama
once
IB,
destroyed with
though
her
she
own
stayed,
hands,
kept her distance.
News of Chief
Only
Obina's
watching
death
him from her corner
broke
chair
a week
as he
later.
washed plates
A massive
or cardiac
veranda,
arrest
like a penitent
It wasn't
servant.
sudden. He
His
started
body
sending
had been
lunch
failing
anonymously
since
to
the day
Ngozi's
the
catering
DNA
locations
results arrived.
every Thursday.
But what
Jollof
truly
rice
killed him
fresh
wasn't the
plantain,
stroke.
puff.
It wasn't the
Nothing
financial
too
loss.
fancy. She
It was
never
the
realization that the
never
son he
acknowledged,
disowned,
but
but
he
he
kept
kept
sending
sending
it
it
anyway,
was the same man who buried
Then
him.
one Friday,
not with soil,
he tried one
but
last
with
thing.
success so
He
loud
visited
that
her
even
church
death
during
couldn't
their
silence
midweek
it.
service.
His funeral
He didn't
was a
walk
quiet
in.
one.
He just
No
waited by
otherness,
the gate,
no
holding a bouquet
senators,
of white
no
roses.
business
her
partners.
favorite.
When
Only
she
a
came
handful
out,
of distant
surrounded by
family members,
women,
a
from the
disgraced
ushering
Amara,
team, seated
at the
far
corner.
He didn't
hiding
speak.
her tear-stained
He just held
face
out the flowers
behind a veil of
She
shame.
froze,
The mighty
not out of
Chief
shock,
Obina,
but out of
whose
weariness.
name once commanded
Their
cities,
eyes met,
was lowered
She took
into
the
the ground,
flowers silently,
forgotten
but
by
didn't
the very
smile.
society.
One of the
once
ushers
kissed his
asked,
feet.
"Is this your husband?"
As the
She
final
replied,
sand covered
without
the
turning,
casket, he was.
Chuka stood
The answer
silently,
hit Damian
hands
like thunder
folded,
wrapped in silk,
dressed in all
She didn't
black.
say it with venom,
But there was no
she
tear
said
in
it
his
with
eyes.
finality.
No
A
suddenlies.
line drawn
Just
in the
a
sand.
deep, solemn
He stood
silence.
still as
His
she
mother
walked past,
stood beside
the
him,
distance
gripping
between
his
them
arm,
now filled
whispering
with silent
prayers.
history.
Not
that
the dead,
night,
but
he
for the
lay
living.
on the living room floor.
"My son," she
staring
said
at the
softly,
ceiling.
"let
He
this be the
whispered,
last day
"I
you
love
carry
you
this
to the
burden."
walls.
Let
Hoping
the earth
maybe
take
the
it with
echo
him.
would carry it to her
Chuka
heart.
nodded,
But
his
his
silence
eyes remained
said
on the
everything.
grave.
She was
not
no
because he
longer
mourned a
his.
father,
Days
but because he
turned to
stood
weeks.
as living
The
proof
neighbors
that the
began to
grave
talk
could
again,
not bury the
this
truth,
time with pity.
nor could betrayal
He really
bury
changed,
destiny.
Ja,
As
someone
the guests
said.
dispersed,
If to say
Chuka
he
remained
changed for a
earlier.
moment longer,
Mom and
whispering
Ketchy
now
under his
greeted
breath.
him with
You
less
tried to
contempt,
erase me,
even offering
but
him
today,
food occasionally.
it is you the
But
world
what
has
does
erased.
kindness matter?
And
to
with
a
that,
man
he
who had
turned his
lost
back
the only thing
on the
that
grave,
mattered,
on the
Damian
past,
didn't
and
stop
on every
trying,
scar that
but he
led him
stopped
there.
expecting.
Months later,
He returned to
the
work,
skyline of the
applied
city
to a new
bore the
firm,
towering sign,
and declined the offer
CN
to
Global
sue Vivian
Empire,
for damages.
legacy in motion.
He wasn't interested
Chuka's
in vengeance.
story became legend.
He just wanted
The boy
peace.
who was mocked for
One
being
evening,
poor,
he
betrayed
passed
by
by
love,
Ngozi's food
rejected
stand
by blood,
disguised in a tin
only
cap.
to rise
She
and
was
own
laughing
every genuinely
genuinely,
ever denied him.
surrounded by
He didn't
people,
just build wealth,
full of life.
He built
She had
hospitals,
healed,
funded
he
scholarships
smiled,
for struggling
not
youths,
out of happiness,
opened free schools
but out
for
of
girls,
resignation,
like Amara
he
once
whispered,
She
But
doesn't
when
need
asked
me
in
anymore.
interviews
And
why
he
he
was
gave
right.
back so much,
She didn't.
his answer was
But
always
that
the
didn't
same.
mean he
Because
stopped
I know
loving
what
her.
it feels like
It
to
was
be
on a
thrown
cool
away.
Saturday morning that
As for
Damian
Amara,
made the
she
decision
faded
to pack
into the
away
shadows.
what was left
No
of the
one
life
heard of her
he
again.
once hoped for.
Some say
the wedding
she
frame
left the
came
city.
down from the wall.
Some say she
Carefully
became a
wrapped
cleaner in
and
a
placed in a
restaurant where the
shoebox.
waitresses whispered.
Her old wrapper,
She was once
the one she
married
left
to
behind,
a billionaire,
was folded and kept
but
in
no
his
one really
drawer
cared
not to be
anymore.
thrown away,
The
but
only name
preserved,
the city
like the
remembered,
last chapter
the
of a
name
book
that
he could
echoed
never
in
reread
boardrooms in
but couldn't
schools.
forget.
In the hearts
He
of
sat
those
at
he
the center
lifted.
of the room,
Was
Chuka.
divorce papers
The
signed
boy they
but not
mocked
filed,
became the
just
king
resting
they
there
never saw
beside
coming.
a faded
Thank
Bible
you for
and a
watching
bottle
this
of
video.
palm wine.
line. What did you learn from this story? Gently. Drop it in the comments. Children, please make sure you like, life went comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, TOCHI Stories, for more. He whispered her name one last time, Ngozi, not as a plea, but as a farewell. She had given him everything. Her heart, her peace, her trust. And he had broken it all. Now, he could only honor it by letting her go completely. Elsewhere in the city, Ngozi knelt at a local children's center, handing food packs to orphans. Her smile was calm, purposeful. The same pain that once broke her had built a new version of her, stronger, quieter, more discerning. One of the young girls tugged her arm and asked, "Auntie, why you never marry?" She smiled and replied, "Because I haven't finished loving myself." That answer lingered in the air. She hadn't closed the door to love forever. She had just learned that love without dignity is slavery, and no matter how much her heart still throbbed in quiet hours, she would never return to a place that cost her voice. Her catering business was thriving. She had enrolled in a baking school part-time. Her life was not glamorous, but it was hers. Whole, untouched by pity. She saw the world differently now, not as something to conquer or please, but something to serve with authenticity. She no longer waited for apologies. She no longer needed closure. Back in Surulere, Damian stood at the gate and watched the compound for one last time. He handed the landlord his keys and walked out with only a small duffel bag. Not running away, just stepping forward. As he walked past the junction where he and Gozi once bought roasted corn, he stopped briefly. The vendor recognized him. "Oga, you know day come with your wife again?" Damian smiled faintly and said, "She's not my wife anymore." Then paused. "But she was the best thing that ever happened to me." And with that he turned and disappeared into the Lagos dusk, a man scarred, a man wiser, a man who had finally understood the cost of silence, the price of pride, and the kind of love you only get once, and sometimes lose forever. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.